Good evening and welcome to the digital edition of State of Addiction, What Every Family Should Know About Opioids. I'm your host, Dion Guillory, and tonight we are going to talk about addiction. It comes in many forms and is defined as a biopsychosocial disorder characterized by repeated use of drugs or repetitive engagement in a behavior such as gambling, despite harm to self and others. Now, if you are just joining us, we are diving a little deeper into the conversation about opioid addiction, and we'll tell you ways you can get help for yourself, your friends, or loved ones who are ready to embark on the road to recovery. We will talk to a panel of experts about prevention, education, and significant investments made in battling the opioid epidemic. Find out how opioids affect the brain and the long-lasting effects on a person experiencing drug dependence. Plus, hear from one woman fighting every minute to stay on track as a person who has stopped using drugs. And let's remember this: words matter. The terms and phrases we should all use when discussing alcohol and other drugs and the people who use them. All right, right now I am joined by a group of people who deal with opioids in some way every single day. Joining us are Jim Wahlberg, Executive Director of the Mark Wahlberg Youth Foundation, filmmaker and author of The Big Hustle; Monica Taylor from the Louisiana Attorney General's Office; Michael Sater, Assistant Special Agent in charge of the DEA Baton Rouge District Office; Randy Harness, Group Supervisory Special Agent, DEA, Baton Rouge District Office. Thank all of you for joining us in this. We got a lot to get to, so let's dive in. Starting with you, Monica, if we can. The Attorney General has made a significant investment in battling the opioid epidemic, from education and prevention, community building, placing drug take-back boxes throughout the state, also arming first responders with Narcan. Why did the AG take this approach, and what results have we seen so far?
Thank you, Dion. Thanks for doing this and having us be part of this. We're very honored to be here with DA and the Wahlberg Group. For the Attorney General, the conversations that he and I have had together is that he is someone who is pro-life, and so this is about saving people's lives. This is about people's quality of life and them being able to live long enough to get the treatment and get the help that they need. And so that's part of the reason it's also touched him personally, as it has touched pretty much everybody personally in some way or another. He's lost several friends to this issue. And so he's very, very passionate about it. We've been honored to work with DEA and participate throughout the state in their National Drug Take Back Day, and then also to work with other groups to place permanent drug take back boxes in just a little over 50 parishes. There, we have 70 boxes that have been placed throughout the state, where people can go and give those drugs back at any time.
Yeah, and giving those drugs back with no penalty or anything like that. It's just, you know, you're able to get those out of your home.
Exactly, and that's so important for people to get them out of their homes. We hear stories sometimes of, like, if somebody knows that someone has been in hospice, when the funeral is actually taking place, their house will be broken into to steal the drugs that were used during hospice, which these opioids are very important to use during hospice. And so that's why we have worked with another company to get a donation of medication disposal pouches that we give to hospice groups so that they can get rid of the medication before the funeral, right after the person is deceased, so that we can get those out of the homes and they don't end up on the streets.
Yeah, definitely. Michael, I want to move over to you. What is the degree of usage in the community, and who is using?
So the degree of usage has gone up, at least in the city of Baton Rouge, almost 100% since last year.
Wow.
The people using, so just for instance, we've already got 33 confirmed opioid overdoses for this year. Last year, I think there was approximately 242 overdoses. 85% of those were fentanyl-based. It was either heroin, cocaine, or methamphetamine laced with fentanyl. So 85% of those overdoses were fentanyl-based. And what we're seeing as far as who's using or what segment of society or of the city is using it. Honestly, it's all demographics. It's not any one particular set of genders or age or demographic. It's all across the board. We're seeing it with everybody throughout the parish and throughout the Baton Rouge region, and it's affecting kids, it's affecting young people, it's affecting older people, professionals, and so we're just trying to get a grip on trying to educate people as to the dangers of addiction and abuse.
Yeah. Randy, I want to move to you. There's this term that, I'll be honest, I just learned about it today when doing some research for this. Counterfeit pills. What are counterfeit pills?
Counterfeit pills often appear to be identical to prescription pills, and they're often abused, but they contain none of the promised drugs that abusers are looking for. They often contain fentanyl and items as such.
Jim, what do you think are the two most important things we as a community can do to help those who are struggling with opioids? Because, as you know, we've heard here that it affects everyone, no matter your age, your gender, your background.
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, the number one thing right now is that we're living through this pandemic, right? So recovery is connection, it's community, it's love, it's friendship. And addiction is the exact opposite of that. It's isolation, separation. So I would say that, you know, everybody has one of these phones, right? They're walking around, we're still separated and isolated. Not as much as we were in the last few months, but, you know, if you know somebody that's in recovery, even if it's early recovery or long-term recovery, right? Calling somebody and letting them know that their recovery matters to you, that it's important to you, that you are rooting for them, that you're in their corner, that they matter, I think is very important. I think that's probably the simplest thing one can do, right? In terms of protecting our loved ones, particularly our young people, right? The simplest thing, we talked about it a little bit here today, right? The drug take back or drug give back, right? People seem to, have a sense that, oh, I paid for this, right? I had an injury a year ago. I paid for this. It's mine. I might get another injury, right? And I can save money next time because I already have this, right? Simple little thought, right? And I understand it. I think most people do, right? But the problem is that there's a very good chance that those drugs are going to end up in the wrong hands, whether it's your children's hands or one of their friends' hands, a niece, a nephew, a relative, a plumber, anybody coming into your house. So a simple step is to get those drugs out of your house. Take them to a drop-off place. Don't just dispose of them anywhere. Take them to an official place where they'll be properly disposed of.
Yeah, and the concern there is if you just dispose them anywhere, someone else can get them, and we see, the problem continuing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Monica, I want to move to you with this question because Jim talked about our phones and how this pandemic has changed us, and we all started using our phones differently more than a year ago when the pandemic started. And this pandemic has clearly impacted the opioid epidemic. What are some of the biggest challenges we are experiencing, and why are so many people relapsing?
Right. So, as Jim said, it's the isolation. Recovery is all about community and being with other people, and so we're seeing some of those numbers go up. And when someone is relapsing, that's a very dangerous time for them. It's a time when they are at the largest risk of overdosing. And I know Mike talked about this a few minutes ago when he was talking, but I had a chance to reach out to the East Baton Rouge Parish Coroner office this week and talk to them about where their numbers are and what they're seeing. And while we did see an increase between 2018 and 2019 in the overdose deaths, we saw almost double the deaths in 2020. And we were already on track for it to be a lot higher than it was in 2019, but then the pandemic hit and it really accelerated it. And they gave me some new numbers, and they said this year, so far in 2021, as of 4/12, which was just last week, we have 57 overdose deaths in East Baton Rouge Parish alone. 57 people have died of overdose. And so that just goes to show you how the pandemic and how widespread this is. Because of the pandemic, people don't necessarily have those support systems that they usually have whenever they are in recovery. And that really is one of the most important things whenever you're in recovery, is to have a support system and to have a group of people that you can rely on. So what Jim said is so spot on in the fact that, if you know somebody in recovery, whether 10 years in recovery, 10 days in recovery, reach out to them, check in on them, make sure that you're talking to them and that they're not feeling that isolation.
Yeah, it's all about having that connection there so they can know that, hey, someone is in their corner.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Jim, you made a significant personal commitment to fighting the opioid epidemic. Why did you get involved?
Well, I get that question often, and my response is, why not? Why wouldn't everybody get involved, right? The thing is, we're hearing that everybody knows somebody now, right? Or everybody's affected, right? That's kind of where I was. I was enjoying my recovery. I was, 20 some odd years in my own recovery, and I was making films, and I started to hear about all these young people that were dying. And then I started to hear people that I knew that had lost their own children. And so I felt as though it was sort of a responsibility to at least be part of a conversation. So I made a film, and I thought I would make that film and then I would move on and just go back to enjoying my recovery. And, for lack of a better explanation, God had other plans for me. I made that film, and since that film was made, if only, it's been shown to over 500,000 young people. I just started getting calls. Would you come and help facilitate a conversation? Will you come? My community doesn't know how to have this conversation. Can you help us? And I'm not sure I was fully equipped to do it, but I did it because I couldn't say no. And now it's several years later, and here I am still in the middle of this thing where I feel this is where God wants me, right? And this is where I need to be. This is where any responsible person that has the wherewithal and the ability to do this should be doing it. Whether it's with addiction or mental illness or whatever it is, this is my place. This is where I belong, and this is where I can be of the most use. So I choose to use my time, treasure, and talents to reach as many people as I can.
Jim, would you say that really helped you with your recovery?
Absolutely. I mean, listen, here's the thing about recovery. You don't get to keep it unless you're giving it away, right? That's how this thing works. It's kind of a weird thing, right? But if I'm not actively involved in my recovery, and being actively involved in my recovery means being of maximum service to others, right? That's how I get to enjoy my life. And so, yeah, it absolutely enhanced my own recovery, yes.
Yeah. Michael, let's talk to you again. You know, we have a lot of parents and caretakers who are watching this evening. How easy is it for kids to get their hands on these drugs?
It's very easy. If your kids aren't being monitored, if they don't have any kind of activities to do, the drugs are very accessible. That's why we do our drug take-back program, because there's probably sometimes more drugs in somebody's home than there actually might be in the street. And these kids will get them without knowing the dangers or the side effects or the addictive properties that these drugs have. And so a lot of the addictions start with kids when they're young because they have access to these drugs. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, you know, this particular year, because kids weren't in school, they had a lot of extra time in their hands, and a lot of the kids weren't being monitored, and there was no place for them to go. There was no social activities, and these kids would just get together in groups and bring drugs that they would find from home, you know, drugs that were being dealt on the street from distributors and brokers. So again, that's why we have these drug take-back programs. That's why we have these educational programs. You know, DEA's, I think, done a really good job of partnering up with drug prevention stakeholders to get the word out and to educate these young people that, you know, that there's other alternatives to taking drugs, and that taking drugs, the dangers of taking them and the addictions that can cause adverse consequences, as we're seeing this year and the year prior, that we need to be accountable to these young people and do what we can do. Last year or 2 years ago, we had a Operation 360 where we were able to get thousands of kids together in stadiums, and we would do presentations, and we have the DEA dance team and different functions to show the kids that there's other options that they can do besides trying to take drugs.
Yeah. Jim, I know you've worked a lot with families dealing with the loss of a loved one to substance misuse. What advice do you have for families trying to manage this loss? Because, you know, it's very difficult to deal with loss, but this one takes it to another level.
Yeah, I'm not sure that anybody really ever gets to figure out how to deal with this kind of a loss, right? What I've noticed is that we still have a considerable amount of stigma around addiction. And, you know, a friend of mine put it to me this way. He said, you people, you want everybody to look at this like it's a disease, right? He said, but if you tell your neighbors, my kid has cancer, they make you a casserole, they cut your grass, they wash your car, they help you, they take care of you, they embrace you. But if you tell your neighbor, my child suffers from substance use disorder, they pull their shades down, they lock their windows, they tell their kids to stay away from you, and they avoid you in the supermarket like somehow it's your fault or it's contagious, right? We have a serious dilemma in our country with a lack of love and a lack of respect, human respect and dignity for each other, right? You know, somebody told me one time that people, they lost their child. And unfortunately, I know thousands of people now have had to bury their children as a result of an overdose. But they said one of the biggest things that bothered them was that people would talk to them, but they wouldn't talk to them about that. They would avoid that topic whatsoever. like somehow they would be reminding them of their child who died from an overdose. And they stopped them and said, listen, it's okay. Ask me questions. I want to tell you about my child. I want to tell you that they were more than a person that suffered from this illness, that they were my child. They were a sibling. They were a student. They were many other things. People are more than the label that we put on them, right? So I really think that we need to love each other. We need to love each other. We need to embrace each other. I think this is such a, man, the stigma attached to this thing is such a terrible thing. And I know that when we do events like this and when we are front and center and we're talking about these issues, it helps to chip away at it. But I still think we have a long way to go with stigma.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there. You know, it kind of, to kind of be cheesy and quote a song, but what the world needs now is love.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great conversation. Thank you all for joining us this evening to share more information about how opioids can affect anyone's life. It's very, very enlightening and opened my eyes. Thank you guys so much. For more information about these organizations and Drug Take Back Day, click around right here on brproud.com. Now, after this quick break, Monica Taylor will break down the neurobiology of opioids. Are you going to learn a little more about this topic tonight? One thing you may not realize is that opioids affect your brain and the way you think. Monica Taylor from the Louisiana Attorney General's office stayed with us to talk about the neurobiology of opioids. And Monica, thank you for spending a little more time with us and talking about this. First question I have on this topic is, what effects do opioids have on the brain?
Yeah, so it's a mouthful, right? When we say the neurobiology of addiction or neurobiology of trauma,
I have to practice that a couple of times.
Yeah, exactly. I have to practice too, and it's really not about making people understand what the brain, like to get all into the nitty gritty of the brain. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a medical doctor. I mostly teach law enforcement, but I want law enforcement to understand what the addict brain looks like, what someone who is in recovery or someone who is currently in their addiction, what their brain actually looks like. And so your brain, as you can see from this slide, is made up of several different parts, and it actually attacks your limbic system. And what the opioids do is they stop the pain receptors going from your body, and they stop right in between the spinal cord and the brain stem. And you can see that right at the bottom of this. And your limbic system, which is that huge purple part in the middle, that is where your brain, all of your emotions are. That's where you have so much of your feelings and your memories and all those kinds of things. And that is all right there. And that part of your brain is what is attacked by the opioids. And so you don't, even if you have some kind of trauma or depression in your life, it can also click in there and really start to change the way that your body starts to react. And what happens is you have something in your body called dopamine receptors. And with the dopamine receptors, your body produces opioids. It's called opiates that your body produces. And you can see here on this one, the opiates in a normal person, sorry, not a normal person, in a person who is not in addiction, the opiates will bind to your receptors, and that's how you're happy. That creates endorphins, and it makes you happy, and it makes you excited. And so whenever you use an opioid or heroin or fentanyl, it attacks these receptors in your brain. So when someone gets off of them, if they've had long-term uses of these drugs, especially fentanyl and heroin, what you see is that these receptors are damaged. And these receptors don't respond in the normal way. So what you have is you have depression, and this oftentimes causes the relapse that we see over and over again.
Okay. When you explain it that way, it starts to really make sense. And you mentioned, so people who think they know about opioids, you know, there are people who think they know, and they just may know surface. And you hear the terms heroin, and you hear fentanyl. You mentioned those. But what is the difference between the two? Because, you know, those are two big names within this, but they're right. Very different.
Yeah, so you heard the guys from DEA, they were talking about, you asked them about counterfeit prescription drugs. One of the things that we are seeing is that the fentanyl, which you see here in the middle, the fentanyl is actually added to a lot of counterfeit prescription drugs, even those that are not opiate related. So that is Xanax, Adderall, a lot of these drugs that younger people are buying on the streets. They think they're getting prescription drugs, but it's really not. So what I want you to do is look really closely at this picture and see this is the same amount of potency in each of these three containers. So you can see the heroin, which is all that you get now. It's all synthetic when you're buying it on the street. It's not the from the opium plant like it used to be. It's all synthetically made. So heroin you see is the first one, and that's the most. And the amount of fentanyl that is in that middle vial is equivalent to the amount that is in the heroin. And then in the carfentanil, which is the third bottle, I know it looks empty, but it's not. Right in the rim, it's got just a little bit of powder in it. And so this is all the same dose across all three of these bottles. So if you buy heroin from someone and you do not know that they have fentanyl in it, and you use the same amount of heroin that you are used to using, you're actually using a product that is 50 times more potent than what you thought you were using, which is just an ingredient for an overdose. It's you're setting yourself up to enter an overdose situation.
Yeah, just that example of those vials next to each other, that really puts it into perspective. Monica Taylor from the Louisiana Attorney General's office, thank you so much for really breaking this down and the effects these opioids have on the brain.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us and for doing this program.
Well, those most familiar with the effects of the opioid epidemic are treatment facilities. Zach Labe checks in with Elevate Treatment and Legacy Center right here in Baton Rouge.
I can definitely tell you that we have reached that point where there has to be something done.
Addiction doesn't have a face, and that's a message from Elevate Treatment and Legacy Center in Baton Rouge.
Addiction looks like me, looks just like you. It don't have a face, but it definitely has caused casualties in families.
But what is addiction? Clinical Director Jennifer Rush explains.
The medical side, a lot of times you're going to look at that chemical dependency where that body seriously craves a substance. And a lot of times it's talked about in the brain because it's a reward system. Like you use a substance, it makes you feel good, so you do it over again. It's a reward system, medically. Clinically, it's when it messes you up in a way of emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and so changes the way you think about things. It changes the way you prioritize things. It makes you rethink your values, rethink your morals, and it's one of those things it makes the entire person on the inside change.
Co-founder Wes Pope says while some centers take a more aggressive approach, Elevate handles treatment differently.
We feel like that people in this that are in the midst of their addiction truly have a need for love. They haven't been loved. They've put themselves, through depths of despair that a lot of us really have never seen.
And many of the people involved in the program are recovered themselves.
I was a severe heroin addict for 6 years. I've done multiple years in the penitentiary. I've neglected my kids. I've been a horrible brother. I've been a horrible son. I've had 6 suicide attempts. I've had 5 overdoses. My latest suicide attempt was April 11, 2019. 2 days later, after making a covenant with God, the doors of a treatment facility was open to me, and I hadn't looked back since. And since Elevate has opened, it's only grown me more spiritually than ever before.
When I got sober in March of 2016, I found my way into the field and just had a passion for helping people and wanted to create something that helped the community, that helped raise me.
Treatment begins with a series of pre-assessments to determine which treatment works best for the client. And the center offers a variety of inpatient and outpatient options.
What we have to understand is that there is no cookie cutter program. Every single person's program and treatment is different. Everybody has a different treatment plan based upon what they need.
Although each client's treatment will look different, Rush says there are still some milestones that make her proud.
I've been doing this for 13 years, and I recently had a client come back and show me that he just got his 4-year chip. It's moments like that that make me continue doing my job, because unfortunately we will lose a lot of people in the United States to addiction, but we will also save people.
Zach Labe, BR Proud.
And for more information on the Elevate Treatment and Legacy Center and how they can help, visit their website at elevatetreatment.com. Well, we often hear about the opioid epidemic, but very seldom do we get to hear from those fighting minute by minute to stay on track. Joining us to talk about the toll opioids took on her life and how she's turning things around with her nonprofit is Ariel Butler. And I'm just going to say, before we get into this conversation, sis is going to drop some knowledge on you. Hello, Ariel, and thank you for joining me.
Hi, Dion. Thank you for having me.
I want to start with this question. You know, there are a variety of different ways someone can fall victim to any kind of opioid or drug abuse. You know, perfect example here, rapper DMX. You know, he was tricked by someone he looked up to when he was 14 years old, and staying in recovery was a battle he faced up until his recent death. Now, walk us through your journey. How were you introduced to misusing substances, and how old were you?
Exactly. I loved how you said that, because everyone's beginning, how it happens is so different. And just like my story, I was already dealing with a eating disorder in my life. So I was already down on myself. And I was 19 when I had mouth surgery done at a local dental office. And I was overly prescribed an opioid. And I keep documentation of everything, and looking back on it and looking back at my life where I can see the prescriptions and where I was overly prescribed at 19 years old, never taking an opioid in my life. And that led me to 10 years of an addiction. It started off with, like I said, trying my first opioid, my first Percocet, and it led me to being a full-blown IV heroin user.
Yeah. And, you know, through the process, you know, while you were struggling with recovery, you had 2 children.
Yes.
What advice do you have for women in this position? Because, you know, being having an addiction and trying to get into recovery can happen to anybody. Where can they get help?
Yeah, and it doesn't have a face. And I loved what everyone said. And the stigma is that it looks a certain type of way. You know, an addict looks like the person on the side of the road who's holding up the sign. You know, the skinny person that doesn't eat with greasy hair that your mom or your dad told you to never talk to. But that's so not true. You know, it's the mom at the grocery counter. It's the person sitting next to you in the pew at church. It's the pastor standing up at church. You know, it does not have a face. And that's what we need to come to realize. Once we start there, once we start realizing that it doesn't have a face and that it can be anybody and that it is anybody, then we can start the conversation, Dion. Then we can start the help. Then we can start with opening the door to getting the help that people really need and not making people feel like because they're pregnant. I was pregnant with my son when I was struggling with my addiction. You know, and I look back now and I think if I would have had the help now, if the conversation would have been like it is now for me then with my son, or I would have been helped more, would I would have went on a different path. You know, people need to feel comfortable. People need to feel like it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to get help. And this right here is a step towards that. Right now, we are doing that.
Yeah, I always say things always start with a conversation and being and letting people know that they're in a safe space.
Yes, and we have to be transparent. We have to be honest with ourselves and with each other. That's where it starts. It starts with, you know, letting it be known that everyone deals with some sort of addiction, whether it be drugs, whether it be sex, whether it be a relationship. No one is greater than the next person. And it starts with being transparent.
Yeah, definitely. Kelly Osbourne recently admitted that she relapsed after years of no longer using drugs. What advice do you have for people struggling with relapses, and how can family and friends support them in this way?
I love that question, Dion, because I relapsed. That's the realization that it's going to happen. You know, we have to forgive ourselves. That's the advice that I have to anyone that has a relapse, that is going to relapse, that is struggling right now. Forgive yourself. You have to do that because you're not going to move forward if you don't forgive yourself. Those things are going to happen. You know, get back up. Get back up stronger than before. Wipe that off, wipe that dust off, and get back up and do what you have to do. Be stronger than the next time. Now you know. Now you know what happened before. And the next advice I want to give you is to write down everything. Keep a journal because your life is important. You're a superhero. I like to tell, don't go down on yourself. You went through something in your life that has made you a superhero. I look at myself as an amazing mother. I went through an addiction, yes, that made me who I am, but I'm also a mother. I'm also a daughter. I'm also a friend. I'm also a student, you know, and I like to look at myself more than that. And each one of us need to look at ourselves that way. You know, we are so important. We're so amazing and we're so powerful.
Yeah. And people aren't just one-dimensional either. You know, we're so many different things.
Yes. And we each have a story. You know, we each have an amazing story. Every one of us has something that we've gone through. Dion, you may have something that you've gone through that has made you who you are today. And sharing that and not being made to feel like you're less than is key. No one is less than. And that's where my nonprofit comes into play, is that I want to educate families, individuals on what addiction does to the brain. And I love how we brought that up because it took time for me to realize that, you know, it affected my brain. I had to learn how to be a person again. I had to learn how to love again. I had to learn how to be a citizen again. And that takes time and that takes patience. So be patient with that addict. Be patient with that person that you know is struggling with addiction. You know, love them. Be there for them. No matter what, through anything, be there for them. And that's what my nonprofit talks about it. It brings the education to the people that don't know what addiction does to the brain. And it brings that conversation and that transformation to the amazing flower that person becomes. They become a completely different person. And I know that families want to be a part of that. You know, they were there with that person through their demise. They were there with that person through their worst moments. Well, let's be with that person through their best moments. Let's be with that person through their recovery. You know, that story of triumph. Everyone loves a good story of triumph. And that's where recovery is.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned your nonprofit because, you know, before we started this special, you know, there was a conversation about, and I just love the story that you told about why you named it Ariel's Choice. Tell us about that.
I've been through so many ups and downs with my recovery, and it took me a long time to find out what works for me. You know, what works for Ariel. And just like the Elevate with their organization, we each have our own personal journey. And my recovery doesn't fit the same way as Bob's recovery or Robert's recovery. And it's not fair to put people's story and their recovery in a certain box. That's not fair. We each have our own route. We each have our own road to go down. And that's where Ariel's Choice comes into play, because I want each person to put their name where my name is. It's your choice. Every single day you get up, you're going to make that choice to either stay sober or to use. Each and every single day. And accountability is key. That's what I've learned in my recovery, is that we have to be accountable. We have to set goals. And that's what I want to bring to light, is that recovery is such a beautiful thing. Being sober is such a beautiful thing. And it's a beautiful choice that someone makes in their life. And that's what my nonprofit is about, is that once you make that choice, that one choice, to not put a needle in your arm again, to not snort that last pill, to not smoke that last joint. Once you make that one choice, everything else will come into play. Mm-hmm. You're going to watch the beautiful butterfly transform, and it's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, you mentioned accountability as part of, you know, your recovery. Is that just one of the ways, or what are the other things that you do to stay on track with it?
I set goals. Like I said, daily, you have to have goals in your life. Let's be realistic. If you don't see a destination, if you don't see yourself getting up every day to fulfill something, what are you going to do with your life? What purpose are you going to have? You're going to be down in yourself. You're going to see that in every ounce of your life. You know, so daily, I set goals with myself. I keep a journal. I write down and I look back at where I was a week ago to where I am right now, and the complete difference that I see in myself in just a week. You know, keep that journal, keep that documentation of your life, because no one else is going to tell your story the way that you tell your story. Yeah. I meditate, I read, you know, I love myself, you know, and you can tell when someone loves their self. You can tell.
And I can see it, and you know, I love it. And I said, before we started this conversation, I said you were going to drop some knowledge. Sis dropped some knowledge. So, Ariel Butler, thank you so much for giving us just a little sneak peek into your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right, let's talk about National Prescription Drug Take-Back Day. It's happening on Saturday. According to the 2019 National Survey on Drug Use and Health, 9.7 million people misuse prescription pain relievers, 4.9 million misuse prescription stimulants, and 5.9 million misuse prescription tranquilizers or sedatives. The survey also showed that a majority of misused prescription drugs were picked up from family and friends, often from the home medicine cabinet. So you can drop off your unused prescriptions Saturday at BRPD headquarters from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Thank you for joining us as we tackled a tough conversation on the opioid epidemic. We hope you will continue the conversation with your family, and don't forget, there are resources to help anyone experiencing drug dependence. You can find those details right here on brproud.com. I'm Dion Guillory. Good night.